Hello, hello, and welcome. So I've got a little echo. Thank you, Jesse. Um, I'd like to introduce, we have Dr. Jackie Faherty, and she is the Senior Scientist and Senior Education Manager jointly in the Department of Astrophysics and the Department of Education at the American Museum of Natural History. And Dr. Tim Chartier, who is a professor of mathematics at Davidson College. Also our Calculus 1 instructor at Outlier, and Jackie is one of our astronomy instructors at Outlier. I'm Aaron Rasmussen. I'm the founder and CEO of Outlier.org. And we'd love to jump in and chat a little bit about what teaching looks like online, how to make it effective, and some of the special considerations that go into it. So to start with, I would love to just get a sense from both of you of your philosophy of teaching, and for lack of a better word, in the before times, when you used to teach in person, which will return, how did you think about teaching?
I can go. One of the big things for me about teaching is that teaching is a process that the student and I take together. So every term is different. I've taught calculus many times to maybe 600, 1,000 students, but it's different each time because we make that journey together. And one of the things about teaching mathematics is that there's a lot of cultural baggage with math. People are pretty willing to tell you that they're not good at math. And if you're a mathematician, you know that pretty much every time you fly, that somebody will point out whether they're good at it or not. And so part of the process of teaching is helping people see, for me, the mathematician in themselves, in the way that it impacts who they are and the way they think, whether or not they use the calculus in this case in the future or not.
Excellent. And I want to chime in there that Tim is also a trained mime under Marcel Marceau. So, you have some experience in performance, and you mentioned when you, Jackie, and I were chatting that you don't think of teaching as a performance, but as something else.
I think of teaching as communication. I think of it as a portion where sometimes the communication can feel one-sided because in some cases the professor is, in a sense, lecturing, but ideally there's a lot of internal dialogue going on with the student, even in those cases. And one of the other parts is that for me, with performing, the objective is for the person to be entertained and to remember things with fondness. I'm looking for something different in teaching. I do want you to look at it fondly, but I want things to be integrated and I want you to feel empowered and feel belonging. I'm not sure I need someone to feel empowered to do mime. That's a pretty lofty goal even for mime.
I want to say, Tim, when I learned you were a mime, I kind of saw you different as an instructor. I'm not sure what changed in my head, but it definitely felt like I was like, I would never have thought of that. But now I think maybe we should take mime classes because that is potentially something we should all be doing, because it does seem like there are some aspects of like the using your body and the physical aspects of being in front of people is really important. I'm slightly different, and I didn't quite answer your other question, Aaron, and I'll give you my 2 cents on teaching right now. Since I come from a different camp than somebody like Tim, in the sense that I'm at an informal education space. I'm at the American Museum of Natural History in New York City. We have prided ourselves on the ability to do things outside of like the standard curriculum, for instance, where we run outreach programs. You come to us after school and we complement what your in-school activities might be, but through an approach that doesn't have to follow any sort of standardized test, for instance. And so this transition has been very interesting for somebody that I was used to bringing people to our space and doing things with people in our space and thinking how to redo the things we did in our space. And I'm an astronomer. I utilized the Hayden Planetarium, this amazing theater where we could have you on immersive tours of solar system, outside the solar system, through the entire edge of the universe. And so reimagining that in the sense that while we prided ourselves on the building, on the infrastructure, on what we were, the past 6 months, we've been trying to pull our assets together and decide what of that can be packaged up and brought to people virtually. And so that is, for me, astronomy is very visual, and I'm in some ways lucky that we've already been working on the software. Then it's a matter of trying to figure out how to get it to people in a way that has driven and enthusiastic people that deliver to them, as well as, you know, the right amount of timing on the content and how much to bring them. So those are the things I've been thinking of. We already had the software, which was a key thing that I know not everybody can have, but software was key, and now it's timings, and it's exactly the way that we pull it together and what platforms.
Excellent. Yeah, it's so the way we met Jackie was, I believe, a cold outreach from our team, and part of our team went to go see the planetarium show in the before times, and was so blown away they just hung out in the lobby and tried to convince her to become an instructor for us. And I should mention that the way we met Tim was by trying to reach out and understand how calculus was being taught. So I had a researcher contact 200 calculus instructors across the US, and I was basically looking for somebody who could translate an excellent performance in class through video, which is hard to do. It's a generally different skill set. And after 3.5 months of calling as many people as I could and talking to as many people as would talk to me about calculus, I think Tim and I discussed calculus teaching for something like 2 hours straight and realized that he was the person we wanted on stream. So with these approaches in mind, let's start by watching the calculus trailer so we get a sense of what Tim means when he says he's looking to communicate. And you get a little sense of this through, and I think a picture is sort of worth 1,000 words in this.
If you have a little bit of anxiety around the idea of taking calculus, I would encourage you to give it a chance.
We don't all learn in the same way.
So we are going to be teaching the same content
In different ways. I'd say my teaching style is somewhat laid back. I'm the only instructor that's using a blackboard.
and I prefer a fountain pen and paper. I want to make calculus a bit more human.
I'll be teaching with a tablet. We're going to look at the infinitely large, the infinitely small.
There's going to be a lot of storytelling alongside the calculus.
I hate to do this to my hometown team, but we're going to look at the Buffalo Bills fan base as our example for exponential decay.
So here we go. Low D high minus high D low over low low. What? Let's piece it together.
There are these mathematical functions in the things that make us happy. This is an example of taking something in the real world and giving you more information through the equations. Basically, if you're in your 20s, enjoy it while it lasts. There is no reason why everyone shouldn't have access to the very best education.
I hope this course can be a gateway to help students from different backgrounds to start their college career.
Calculus is this place where once you've mastered the rules, you can let your curiosity run completely riot.
Welcome to Calculus 1. Let's get started.
Let's get started.
Let's get started.
Excellent. So Tim, I would love to hear a little bit, so the punchline to all of this is it works, right? We see success rates in this calculus course comparable to in-person classes. That's frankly very hard to do. How did you think about making a course that translates so well through video? And why do you think it's been effective?
One of the things that I think is unique about the Outlier process is that, to me, whether it's John or Hannah or me, it's as if you're sitting there with us and we're teaching you. And because it's online, you can do it when you're ready. It's not at 9:30, regardless when your alarm went off, maybe the third iteration of your alarm went off and you came. And partially because of the Outlier staff, I had a strong group of people iterating with me that I would come up with strong examples, but they weren't as strong as the last one. And so we would work together to keep that energy and that insight, because there's a large variety of ways of keeping people interested. And then you have 3 different people working with you. So if you want to see how it is great to be in your 20s when you're working on a derivative. You can. And that, I think that the process of being online is really the process of, if I'm that intimate with you and we're here, then where is that effective? To me, it's not always the question of why does it work online, but why would it work if you were sitting right next to me? Because if you were like, holy crap, I wish I could hit pause on this office hour, then that's not going to work online, which I think is sometimes why it doesn't work online.
It's a great way to think about it. What would you recommend? So you teach Zoom classes now. What have you learned through doing that? And what would you recommend to other instructors in making that jump? Because it's been a pretty, I think we all need a lot of empathy for everybody who's had to jump in and suddenly be teaching Zoom courses after gaining a huge amount of experience teaching in person.
One of the big things for me with Outlier is that we thought a lot about what exactly are we teaching in this section? Like what is the core concept? And rather than trying to fill 50 minutes, we're trying to fill enough time that you learn it, but then creating supplementary resources apart from the video that allows someone to deepen the process. Is sometimes I think of the kind of lecture, if you there are many ways to refer to that, but the lecture portion as enabling you to connect to the belief that you can do it when you get stuck on your own. And that it's something that you can re-watch again and again. And that's what's worked really well for me in the Zoom environment, is that most of these lectures are anywhere from 12 to 22 minutes, and the students re-watch them over and over. In fact, to be honest, I'm a little concerned what happens when we go back to face-to-face, because maybe they'll all come with iPhone. I don't know what we're gonna do. But at the same time, there's something about when you are physically together that's different, and it allows you a different type of teaching that can be really effective.
Fascinating. And Jackie, you do sort of one-to-many YouTube broadcasts. I watched a tour you did of Mars at one point, and it was very effective and engaging. How do you think about sort of this maybe less bi-directional communication than you'd have in maybe a Zoom class, in making that so engaging?
Yeah, I think it's similar in some ways to what you're saying, Tim, in that what I think strive for at all moments is to make the student feel like I'm talking to them, so that it's not just about this like canned thing that we've put together and that you could watch at any time. If anybody feels that way, I feel like you're so much more likely to just tune out, because like it's like anything where, oh, that's for somebody else. And so I try really hard in the things that, and I should back up and say what we do at the American Museum of Natural History right now is we use this visualization software that NASA has funded. It's all open source. It's called the Open Space Project. And we use that and we sit around and we make decisions about what's the content we want to deliver this week in a 30-minute-ish live YouTube streaming moment. And how do we then make sure that every student watching feels very engaged with us, like we're talking to them and not just talking to the ether. And so it's an interesting relation to what you're saying too, because I'm not doing calculus in the sense that when I took calculus, I really did want the instructor next to me. Like I loved that aspect of it because it was foreign to me, and I was a physics PhD. I had a lot of calculus, So when I first started it though, I remember it was not intuitive. I didn't sit down like Newton and think, yeah, I got this. I know exactly what I'm gonna do with Kepler's laws of planetary motion. It comes natural, like this is exactly what you do. No, I wanted somebody with me. Astronomy for me is slightly different. I want a guide. I want somebody, because it's amazing what we're looking at. It's like when I go on road trips through the national parks, and I always think I want a geologist with me, because I'm looking at things and I know they're cool, but I don't know what they are. And I'm not sure why they are that way. Or maybe I know what they are, but I'm like, I know there's more secrets here. So to me, when I create content in this new world, and a lot of what I tried to do for the portion of the Outlier course in intro astronomy that I worked on, was I wanted to make it feel like I have invited the students with me on a rocket ship and we took off, and I'm your guide. And I know a lot about this stuff because I spend my days looking at it and studying it. So I'm the road trip person with you through the national park, which is our universe. Like, ask your questions and I'll probably be answering them along the way because I know what you're going to ask because I've been asking it too. So that's how I see it. I want the students to really feel like I'm there with them as an individual.
I'm just inspired to ask you questions about the universe now.
Ask away. Not now, maybe.
So, Tim, I know you use portions of the Outlier lectures in your Calculus 2 course. And I think this is maybe a good moment for you both to think a little bit, if you're willing, to kind of crystal ball and what does it look like when we go back to in-person courses? Tim, you're saying, you know, that it's sort of altered the way you think about it. What does it look like for all of us?
Well, I don't know entirely, and I'm okay with that. I'm excited that I don't know, and I really truly believe that I am a better professor from working with Outlier. I'm a better professor because of what we've needed to do in the pandemic. And one of the things is our students will know how to learn via online tools. And I want to find ways to use that to the advantage, but also not leave students who've struggled through that and are just having to learn that way. I want to be able to use it as another platform to strengthen what they do. So I'll probably move to more flipped classroom type teaching, but at the same time, I do want to have aspects, particularly where they work together, and that working in collaboration and hearing yourself talk mathematics. You are a mathematician, and like the last day of calculus, I say to students, good at math, you've made it through calculus. And some of them look really stunned that they just haven't really thought, not that I never bring it up during the term, but when that's one of the last things I'm going to say to you, there's a statement there in terms of that. And they are, and our world and STEM needs them stating that I mean it to each student in the room, that if you got a C, that's you know, you may not want to believe that you'll always be technically correct, but to get a C, you know a lot of what's going on at the same time.
Can I just ask, Tim, if you've used some of the like tricks and tools of what you learned from the production team in Outlier? And I think you're going to get to this, Aaron, but we had very different experiences in how the courses were taped from how you did it versus how I did it. And so I'm curious if, because anytime people are watching you and commenting on how you're delivering the content, I think it changes how you see yourself, because it's a mirror. Well, it's a lot of mirrors because it's a lot of people watching you and telling you like what they're getting from it and really trying to get something from it.
Yeah, that's a good question. One of the things for me that actually goes back to what you were saying earlier is one of the big parts to me of the online learning experience is that clearly we're not together. So even acting as if we're together is silly. But at the same time, when you were talking about, I wanted to feel like they're there. The way I look at that is, I want you to know that your engagement makes a difference, that your engagement in this moment enables us to do this together, that I'm speaking to you with the assumption that you're playing your end of it as well. And Outlier just really helped me with that, because we were always concentrating on that. The other thing, just as a technical thing, is like, I always knew this, but because I was in a studio in New York City with the Outlier group, and I had a crew of like 20 where people did my hair and you know, and so forth and so on. But I was always looking at Aaron, given the way that we filmed. And so when I look at cameras, I still think of I'm teaching you Calc 2, Aaron. And so I still look at Aaron in the background. I know how far to look when I really, even though it's Zoom and I have a slide and I have things I'm writing on, when I really want to come in and make that point that you make in class, that moment that you want them to hear later, that echoes within them, like you were saying as the guide, where I don't know if I'm a guide or a coach or both, but where they hear that, please, you know, 0 over 0 is not 1, and 1 over 0 is not infinity, and things like that. These ways that you have that ability to look into the importance of that sight line. That first day when, good grief, Aaron, we must have spent 30 minutes getting that sight line down. But that was neat for me because it underscored that that's part of what's so important. And it's Zoom, so who knows how I do, but I do better than I did, and I do think it helps.
That's a good point.
Jackie, you brought up an interesting point, which is we filmed your whole class in a very different way. We filmed from quarantine. Thanks to our team for having to develop an entirely new methodology. So we should probably roll the astronomy trailer so people can see the situation you were in. And here's a fun fact. Jackie and Tim were both filmed in the same exact studio. The difference is
here's an image of stars that you can see with your unaided eye. Now what I'm going to do is raise the brightness of the stars that you cannot see. Billions of objects, beacons of interest.
What is our place in the universe? Where are we in this vast cosmos?
The answers to these things are really wonderful. All of this becomes a lot more clear when there's a story, when there's a narrative.
I can take you with me on a journey as if we're on a rocket ship and we leave planet Earth and we go and fly amongst the stars.
The surface of the balloon is our entire universe, creating that almost illusion of motion.
Motion and chemistry. Put those two things together and they tell you the tale of 10 billion years ago.
Galaxies are much closer together than even the nuclei in your own body, relatively speaking. The universe is denser than you are. Wow.
Astronomy is a reminder that we can look up to see all the stories that the universe has for us.
It starts with a curiosity. Anyone could build a telescope, and anyone can look up at the sky and learn the truth.
I don't think astronomy is just of the very far away. I think that astronomy will also teach us a lot about who we are as people. Your past, your present, and your future are all waiting for you here in the Introduction to Astronomy.
Let's get started.
Let's get started.
Let's get started.
Very nice. So, Jackie, I have a question for you because you managed to really keep your energy up throughout this whole thing. And you're essentially teaching to a mostly empty space.
Dark room, yeah.
Just, how do you think about that? Because I think this would be very useful as instructors think about how to, talk over Zoom. I struggle with it when I lecture at colleges. I'm not getting that feedback, and I usually run sort of long and this sort of thing.
Yeah.
How do you do that?
I think this is my general perception. So the comment I almost always get back every time I give a talk is, "Oh, you're so enthusiastic," and I think I'm not actually trying to do anything. What I think that maybe I just do naturally, but everybody can and should do it, is I really love what I'm teaching you. I really think that it's the greatest stuff that I could possibly be talking about right now. And I don't let all the craziness of the day get in the way of it. And it's almost like a meditative state maybe that I want to enter, because it's easy when it's astronomy, because it's like I get to leave Earth with everything that's going on here and think about and talk about all this other stuff. So my advice to everybody on Zoom that teaches is harness your inner enthusiasm, harness your inner passion for your content. I know it's not comfortable to be talking to, headphones, talking to a blank room. I've given now several plenary talks. I don't know how many people are watching this, but I've given a lot of talks that I know thousands of people are watching. And I don't think about, but it's empty. Like, who knows who we're talking to? However, the content is still what you're talking about. And the content is and how you feel about it should come out. Let it out. Let people love it like you love it, and see how much you love it. Because I think once you recognize that people see it, they can tell, do you like it? Do you not like it? They're watching you carefully because they have nothing else to look at on the screen. Or maybe they check their email, but you don't want them doing that. Don't lose them. Give it to them. Give them your passion. Give them what you've got for what you're talking about. And that's what I do. That's what I did in our little production studio. Gave it a lot of passion.
That's awesome. You mentioned something really interesting earlier when we were talking about the production quality and the content and how those interrelate. I'd love if you could talk a little bit about that. Again, sort of in mind with, there's a lot of people out there who are trying to make these things and have them work.
Yeah, so I think there's an interesting dynamic that goes on between the content that you want to showcase and then how you're going to do it. And I felt this way a lot in astronomy, where say you're like, I know something really, really cool about the universe. And I think it's not just me that thinks, I think everybody should think it. But depending on how I tell you the story, and it might be the storytelling aspect of it as much as it is how we're going to deliver it, you might be like, I don't know, that's not that great. So the thing I like about Outlier is that you guys cared as much about the production and like how cool it was going to look, and it was at no cost to the content. It was never going to be like, oh, I don't really like that visual. It was like, let's work together because the story you want to tell is cool. Let's make sure that that content is there and that people can visually see it. So I'm a very visual learner. And so for me, if I'm going to get to something, if I'm going to really get it and grasp it and then want to go after it and go crazy for whatever it is and like spend my life working on it, I mean, I need to kind of be convinced with the product, with like, let me look at it, let me see it. I'd be interested to hear how you feel about that with calculus, Tim, because I feel like I fell in love with calculus for reasons that had to do with what calculus brought me in a strong, like in the sciences. I didn't fall in love with it for the raw nature of it. And so your aspect of it might be different than mine. Like I love certain aspects of exploring the universe.
Yeah, I'm an applied mathematician, so I would say that what I loved about calculus was similar with you. But when you teach calculus, you very much need to be aware that people will tune in for different reasons. And so you very much pay attention to the why. In terms of your storytelling, why do I want to listen to your story? And as any good story, there are different things that people tune into. When you think of when you go and see a movie and you ask, what was your favorite part? It isn't always the same. And one of the things I loved about Outlier was the fact that we looked for different story arcs by different people. The number of times that someone with an outlier would say, yeah, but what about this type of learner? What about somebody who doesn't like this? And we would keep working on it. And so, because on each one, part of what I think helps with online learning in terms of the energy is that you really believe there's something that you want them, each student can learn. And because people learn in different ways, there's often something that you're talking about that you truly believe is the moment that someone will really engage. So for that student, that's an important moment. And so to me, that was something I really enjoyed with Outlier, both in working on the online materials and then also working on the video lecture itself.
Yeah. Yeah, I really wanted, from my perspective on the course that I worked on, to me, the visual learners and those that definitely thought it was going to be too hard, because we get that a lot in if you say astrophysics, they feel very uncomfortable. It sounds too hard. And to me, it's always bringing it in a way that it's for everyone. It should be for everyone. And so to me, the visual aspect always helps with that, because you can fall in love with the way something looks, and then you want to know more. And then I get the more in with it, but you get the visuals and hook you in, and so that you're there with me when I'm explaining the rest of it, because you want to ask those extra questions that you need a little bit more of the details for.
That's good.
Yeah, it's that mixing of the information cotton candy with the information broccoli. You're like,
Yeah.
hey, look at these delicious visuals. Haha, you're eating vegetables.
Yeah.
So we have got a question from the audience, and this is for Tim. How does teaching these courses fit into your teaching responsibilities at the university?
Doing the online portion so the way I usually talk about working with Outlier is it's like working on a book, and it was a similar type scholarly activity.
That your students, and think always of the diverse student body that you have, can relate to. So to me, that also helps the engagement, because if you don't keep your students' lives in mind at all time and only your life, you're gonna lose them, or you're gonna lose the ones that don't look like you.
Yeah, that's very much the way that I think about examples as well, is that particularly when you're doing something as broad as online learning, where like this semester, I don't know my students in the same way. Last semester, we were halfway through, so I could envision the classroom and I knew them. I'm at the highly selective art school. I know them really well. I don't this term. And so I have to be I don't know if I need to be more careful, because to act like I know what experiences fit is ridiculous, because we don't. But at the same time, it's very, very important to think very broadly and to very much watch language of it being easy or anything that kind of makes assumptions as to ability. That in itself can create blocks to people's access to what you're doing in very important ways.
I'll chime in on this one as well, because we have to think about this a lot. And, part of figuring out STEM engagement strategies was talking to, a couple hundred professors and trying to understand what works, but it was also talking to college students and high school students. And that's where the concept in the calculus course of having 3 different tracks, we call, Tim sort of the greatest hits version. It's all of the sort of best examples that you'd expect to find in a calculus course. Hannah Fry does a social science-based one we call the calculus of happiness, because not everybody wants the traditional physics one. And John Urschel does what we call the fast track calculus approach, which is a lot of calculus taught in the language of math, but then really interesting revelations. For example, when we were showing the acceleration curves of Usain Bolt in a top sprint that he did, we were trying to figure out what was going wrong with our graph, because he actually slows down towards the end of essentially a 10-second sprint. And we're like, what is going on with this? And we look it up, and sure enough, that's true. And seeing that hidden thing, having that access to the invisible world, has a certain attraction to it for some students. But what we found is students love being able to sort of choose between the different different applications of the math. Because I suspect Jackie and I are probably similar in that way. It sounds like you're pretty applied in your use of calculus.
Yeah.
Like I was like, okay, this is a cool hammer. What can I bang on with it? Whereas other students might love the way it fits together. Like once you finally get that fundamental theorem of calculus, you're like, this is incredible. Like how does the world work at such a level of perfection? So we've got another question. This one's probably for Tim, which is just on the assessments for the course. And just, because you're directly involved in those. How did you think about putting those together,
Sure.
for the understanding of the students?
So there are a couple things that were really fun about Outlier. One is that there's a problem generator where on each section, you get infinitely many problems. So it took quite a while to think through kind of if you're going to let a computer create these questions, what are you really assessing? Like, what is the learning goal? But it really does help in getting better at them in terms of the types of questions that you're looking at, that you don't like today I'm teaching differential equations, and I had a student, they said, well, what other one would I do? I'm like, we're going to look on the internet because we're out of problems in the book, and you don't run out. And so that's one thing that I really like. In terms of the quizzes, they tend to come directly after the content. So you have quizzes which are just kind of micro steps through the material, maybe not micro, but smaller steps through the material. Then you have the midterm and the final, which are based on the other material and very much connected, but they're not just reiterations of what's there. So it does get at that ability to really understand the content as well.
When designing the midterm and finals, or sorry, the midterms and final, sort of how traditional are those assessments?
They're traditional in terms of what they have. I mean, they didn't feel any different than what I use at Davidson, and so yeah, they're very much traditional questions in terms of what's there and the breadth of what we're asking as well. Excellent.
And this one's for Jackie. How do you know when you're succeeding with a student? What's the indication? And for you, this might be somebody who attended the planetarium. What sort of feedback do you get in a more casual learning environment?
Yeah, I think this is the hardest part to me about the online aspect, where you don't have as much of that direct interaction. When I give these planetarium lectures, we have our dome, the Hayden Planetarium at the American Museum of Natural History, which seats about 400 people. And I usually give my talks in the dark because show the nighttime sky and all that's in that, right? But I still, I listen for what the audience is doing. I try and hear if there's a lot of shuffling, and I try and do the same thing with Zoom. So I have taught a couple of classes on Zoom, helped with a couple of different professional development things, and I always watch for shuffling, agitation, and seeing like, what is it? If I can catch your eyes, that's ideal, because I want to see if you've caught what I'm saying. I also try, and when I teach, I try and make sure I've got a bunch of crescendo moments, which I know I'll get to, because there's no way that everybody stays with you the whole time. And to draw anybody back, I know I'm going to have to give you something good at some point, multiple points through what I'm trying to tell you. And so I sprinkle every time I give a talk or a lecture, especially a planetarium talk, I have my key moments. And it's like every 7 to 8 minutes, I hit a crescendo. I'm going to take you on a trip. I'm going to build up. I'm going to teach you about the stars and how far away they are. And then boom, I'm going to tell you about the star that's going to fly by in 1,000,000 years. And your mind's going to be blown. And then I'm going to take you back out. And I'm going to move you a little bit farther away from the solar system. And I'm going to show you all the stars that can see the Earth transit, so they can find us. And then boom, I'll take you a little bit further. But I have to build up to each of those. So I have my build up moments, and then I crescendo. And that's, to me, a method of accessing to make sure that, and especially when it's a dark room and I can't quite tell, to make sure I'm giving you the moments where I could have you engaged. So I try and force engagement with those kinds of things.
Got it. And a quick question here, because we're down to our last minute. Have you seen the way in which students and attendees of the planetarium, the way in which they engage with the material change over the last several years, even due to whether it's use of smartphones or just the changing of the generations?
I don't think I've necessarily seen